Hi, I'm Joe Fruwald. I'm an assistant professor in linguistics at the University of Kentucky, and I'm recording this lecture I did today on language acquisition because there was some interest in it when I posted about my preparation for it on Twitter. Um, I think in an ideal world, in ideal circumstances, I'd be doing this YouTube style video essay, but I don't have time for that. I'm doing it how I know how, and that is by recording a Zoom lecture and uploading that to YouTube. Kind of silly, especially because it's about something pretty internety at the moment, which is Bunny the dog. So Bunny is a fairly popular internet dog, a TikTok dog that's been trained to press buttons on a word pad. And this video of Bunny having an existential crisis went kind of viral. Let's see what's going on here.
Did you just say, who this? And then look in the mirror? Who this? That's Bunny. That's Bunny.
Okay. Bunny having an existential crisis. But why am I talking about this? Well, a lot of my students, a lot of other people's students have been uh, following Bunny's language acquisition journey and wanting to talk about it. And I'm wanting to talk about it here because, well, it's relevant and I think an important case study in evaluating evidence and even media literacy, if you will. So the big question to ask about Bunny acquiring language and any comparisons they're making to human language is this what language acquisition is? You know, are we essentially inside our minds learning buttons to press for food? Yes. Pizza, coffee. Um, this is a rhetorical question because, I mean, obviously, I think the answer is no. If we're talking about linguistic structure, we learn a lot about structural relationships between words in order to communicate the things that we want to. Uh, and we do a lot more interesting things with language than just say food when we see food, or coffee when we see coffee, or painting when we see painting. It's actually one of the points that Chomsky makes in his criticism of Skinner's model of language acquisition. But of course, learning the relationship between words, or in this case, buttons that make noise in some kind of referent or event in the world, is something that is part of language acquisition, and it's something that we know dogs and other non-human animals can do. Non-human animal communication, humans interacting, say, with sheepdogs, can do very complex things together. The dogs can learn to associate uh, spoken words or whistles with specific commands, and that's a two-way street, that communication. I'm going to skip over that, but communication is not the same thing as language, and also words are not the same thing as language. Simply being able to communicate with a person doesn't mean you have a shared language. I've communicated with people who I don't have a shared language with at all. And knowing words in a language, even many words in a language, does not mean knowing the language. Um, but what Bunny is doing, or the claims about Bunny, go a bit further than simply that she has learned what the referents are for certain words. The claim seems to be that Bunny appears to be combining a finite set of words to generate novel meanings on the fly that are interpretable to us as perceivers. Um, the big question is, how can we tell? And the sort of big issue we need to get over when watching Bunny's videos, whether we are viewers of the videos or in fact even Bunny's trainer, is humans' aggressive capacity for meaning making, right? So we, another domain that's not language that humans do pretty aggressive meaning making about is in parsing the world for faces, right? So here's some fun screenshots of a stapler that looks like it has a face, and a pocket that looks like it has a face, and a coffee that looks like it has a sad face. These things all look like faces because we have um, cognitive mechanisms that are just on the lookout for faces, and we'll find it, or we'll find them. Uh, Needless to say, a stapler doesn't have a face. This coffee cup does not have a face. We're finding it because we sort of can't help ourselves in making meaning out of the stimuli coming into our bodies. So let's roll back the tape. Let's look at what Bunny did. Bunny pressed a button that said who. Bunny pressed a button that said this. And then Bunny stood in front of a mirror for a little bit. Right? That's what happened. What Bunny's trainer interpreted was, well, Bunny's, in this sentence, in fact, Bunny's trainer is merely repeating back the events she observed, but then we, as viewers of this video, seem to understand that Bunny was asking about the reflection in the mirror. What can we take away from this? Well, let's presume, let's take it as a given that Bunny pressed those specific buttons on purpose, and that Bunny chose that sequence of buttons on purpose. Does this mean Bunny used English to ask the question, who is this? Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that when we say, did Bunny ask who is this, is to remember that sentences are not word beads on a string. There are structural relationships and structural dependencies, especially in questions with WH words that move or whatever, depending on what your syntactic theory is. I have up here a rough tree of what the syntactic structure is for a sentence like, who is this? If your syntactic theory is different, it's going to be different, but there's going to be stuff in there beyond just two words in sequence. So when we say, did Bunny ask, who is this? We're not asking, did Bunny press two buttons in a certain sequence? We're sort of saying, did Bunny do something like all of this structure over here to ask a question in a question answer social practice? And the reason why we might be led down the path of thinking Bunny might have done something like this is that just like seeing faces in objects that don't have faces, humans are particularly gullible when it comes to language appearing things, right? So this is a classic example of Eliza the chatbot, where if you type in a sentence to the chatbot, it doesn't know language. Using pretty simple pattern matching and substitution, it will produce a response question that seems like you're having a back and forth dialogue with an intelligent person, right? So I told Eliza that I guess I'm feeling kind of stressed about this lecture I'm writing. And Eliza said, do you believe it is normal to be feeling kind of stressed about this lecture you're writing? And all that happened was it got feeling kind of stressed about this lecture I'm writing, and just spit that thing back with, do you believe it's normal to be, and replacing I'm with your. It creates the illusion of um, of having a dialogue, but because we know what is running behind Eliza, um, we know that it does not have language or even any intelligence behind it. I'm not saying that's what's going on with Bunny, but what I am saying is what happened was these two buttons were pressed and then Bunny stood in front of a mirror. And then us as human perceivers, as English understanders, can't help but parse who this as having this whole structure. And when we take that whole structure and our question answer social practices and see Bunny looking in a mirror, we project onto it a social parsing of what's happening. That Bunny is asking us, who is this? And looking in a mirror and is asking about the reflected image of the dog. I mean, just as an example of a video, this is another Bunny video where it's possible to have multiple kinds of interpretations of what Bunny is tapping out on the pad, right? So, well, let's just watch this one.
Mom, poop where? I guess we could go for a walk on the trail to poop. Bunny want poop now? Or are you asking where I poop? Oh my God. Mom poop in here. Mom poop over here. Mom poop here.
So there's a case where there is one sequence of events, mom, poop, where, which initially was given one understanding as asking, mom, where can I poop? Or something like that. But then was given another, actually very different understanding. Mom, where do you poop? And we could keep coming up with more and more possible attempts to understand what Bunny was trying to communicate with this sequence of button pushes. And which one is correct, or are any of them correct? I don't know. If you ask me, I think part of the whole most interesting the most interesting moment in this video is when her trainer says, Bunny want poop now? I think it's super interesting that we're seeing the development of a very specialized code, language code that this trainer is using with Bunny. And the fact that we're caught up on whether Bunny is speaking English is sort of getting in the way of figuring out how is it that this is how her trainer has decided to speak with her. So yeah, given one set of inputs, there's infinitude of possible interpretations. Here's another issue. What is Bunny looking at? Bunny says this. This is a word that is deictic, And what that means is it doesn't have a fixed meaning. Its meaning is dependent on context. Right now, I say this, if I can get this to show up, I say this, and it means a pen. Now I say this, and it means a book. Now I say this, and it means a mug. This is a word that what it means is dependent on the context of how it's used. And it's interesting, in some sense, dogs can do deixis, right? So if you point at an object, a dog will look at what you're pointing at and not at the tip of your finger. The fact that Bunny might be utilizing a deictic phrase is not outside the realm of possibility, but the question is, what does Bunny mean by this? This brings up this is an interesting instantiation of the problem of the indeterminacy of meaning. So here's this thought experiment attributed to Quine. Let's say you're hanging out with a person who speaks a language you have no familiarity with, and a rabbit runs out in front of you. They point at it and say, "Gavagai." What does Gavagai mean? And there's a ton of things it could mean. A rabbit has eyes. It could mean eyes. Rabbit has prominent ears. It could mean ears. You can eat a rabbit. Maybe it means dinner. This rabbit is brown. It could mean brown. This rabbit is furry. Maybe it means furry. The rabbit is sitting on grass. Maybe they're pointing at the grass, right? Just hearing the word in the context of an object does not fully specify what the meaning of that word is. And I think we all kind of have this experience sometimes when we encounter a new word people are utilizing, like chungus. I might say, look at this big chungus. What does that even mean? You know, you have to do a lot of work to figure out what that actually means. And it's not immediately obvious what it ought to mean. And in some sense, when we are acquiring our languages, this is a problem for children because a child hanging out with their caretaker is in some sense hanging out with a person whose language they have no understanding of. And if a rabbit runs across the room and a caretaker in an English context says, rabbit, how does the child know that that's what it's referring to? Children get around this with something called the whole object assumption, which is something I will be getting back to later in the course I'm teaching on the topic. So even if we think Bunny is using this to refer to something, what she's referring to is underdetermined. It could be the mirror itself. The interpretation that she must be referring to the reflection in the mirror, specifically the reflected image of the dog in the mirror, is our own attempt to apply an understanding to the scene. Another thing to really keep in mind when trying to understand what we're seeing in videos like this is the power of the edit, right? And the effect that can have on our interpretation of Bunny's linguistic performances. I queued up a video here of the illusionist Darren Brown flipping a coin and flipping a heads 10 times in a row. Quite a feat. I'm not going to play it in this recording, but he does it. It's an uncut video. He flips the coin 10 times. It comes up 10 times. How did he do it? Did he practice flipping coins really carefully? Is it a trick coin? Is it CGI? Well, the final scene of that video has Darren Brown looking kind of jubilant. And interpretation one is that he's smugly showing off his amazing skill at flipping coins. Interpretation two is He's relieved to be done filming after 9 hours of shooting himself flipping a coin until he got one take where he flipped 10 heads in a row just by chance. And as he points out later in this special, that's what he did. You could think about this also like when you see a reality TV show and they're sort of queuing it up like there's going to be a big conflict between two people and there's musical tension and they cut to commercial and then they come back from commercial and it was nothing. Now these are intentional powers of the edit, but even unintentional editing to things like this happening can really bias our understanding of what's going on. For a scientific appraisal of what's going on here, we need to see everything that's left on the cutting room floor. Without even intending to, Bunny's trainer could be leaving important content out. This is a thing that practicing scientists do with some problems, right? So we've, even if we take all the cases of actual research misconduct out of the picture, scientists are motivated investigators. We're seeking publications, clout, grant money for making discoveries, and because of that, sometimes that has an effect on how we report our research. It's a real debate about how to address this problem. But it's worth noting it's something that, is not unknown to scientific investigations, much less an entertainment vehicle. And while trying to be polite and non-slanderous, a bunch of boring videos where Bunny taps out nothing interpretable wouldn't sell any Bunny merch. So why are we looking at it? We're in a linguistics course. I'm teaching a linguistics course. Where else are you going to wind up doing a deep dive into does Bunny have language? It's good to think about how to take a critical look at extraordinary claims, but also something that does kind of matter here, an uncomfortable undercurrent to this is that the history of a lot of non-human language studies have often quite racist and ableist histories. So thanks, Michael Barony, a Twitter friend of mine, for pointing out this reference. In 1885, John Lubbock published a paper in Nature about how he taught a poodle named Van to make requests with cards with words phonetically printed on them so as to, what does he say? So as not to trouble him by our intricate spelling, right? And if you read this whole little blurb that I put up here, this reads basically almost exactly like what Bunny's up to in 1885. Now, John Lubbock also thought about trying to teach his dog how to count. And in discussing that attempt, he brings up Francis Galton, who, in his writing, compared the numerical ability of the Damara people in Southern Africa to dogs. I was going to include the actual quotes from Galton, but I don't think they're necessary to really make my point, and they are super racist. A thing to keep in mind is that when we're looking at the study of non-human animal language use, people will often and quickly try to draw parallels between the simplicity of non-human animal cognition as reflected in their language appearing behavior, as I'm calling it, to the simplicity they imagine in other marginalized people's cognition. And that's sort of always a tendency that's at the gate when you start talking about such and such a dog or such and such a cockatoo or such and such whatever. knows as many words as, and you start comparing them to people, it's an uncomfortable, it's a tendency that we need to be aware of. We also need to talk about these buttons, the origin of these buttons. Did they invent buttons to press for dogs to learn how to talk? And the answer to that is also no. These are known as augmentative and alternative communication devices that are used as a therapeutic device for people who can't use language with their voices, or some people who can't, which have been adapted for dogs. And Bunny's trainer got the idea from somebody who was doing this, somebody who is a speech pathologist, who was probably familiar with these kinds of devices in a therapeutic context for people, and thought, maybe I'll try that with my dog. So another thing to keep in mind, and I'm saying it because it needs to be said, that people with physical or intellectual disabilities, or for whatever reason cannot use language with their voices, are not like dogs. People with physical or intellectual disabilities, or who cannot use language with their voices, are people. And there's an uncomfortable background to this of people thinking, well, it worked for those people, maybe I'll try it out on my dog. That said, am I canceling Bunny? No. No need to unsubscribe or take Bunny down or burn your Bunny merch or anything like that. I think Bunny having an existential crisis is, if anything, good art. It made me think things, made me laugh a little bit, made me think, when was the last time I looked in the mirror and thought, who is this? And gazed out over the water and felt a sort of overwhelming sense of my place in the universe and thought, help, that's art. And it's an interesting instance of a collaborative meaning making between humans and dogs. And I think another thing I want to make clear is I am not saying Bunny does not have an interior life or doesn't have desires or isn't inquisitive. And I'm also not saying Bunny can't communicate with her trainer. I'm not even saying, we can't even conclude that Bunny does not have syntax or does not have English exactly. It's just that we can't come to any conclusion. Even if I did definitely think a dog could acquire human language, the Bunny videos don't contain enough evidence for me to come to support that conclusion. And I think it's highly unlikely that Bunny is freely combining finite semantic meanings in a syntactic structure that generates novel meaning in order to participate in a question and answer social practice. I think a lot of what we're seeing is an interesting activity, collaborative activity between a dog and her trainer, and applying our own aggressive human meaning making tendencies into parsing and trying to understand what we're seeing. If there's a point to this, it's enjoy your videos. Be careful about the kind of comparisons you make between non-human animals and people. And it's worth having a critical eye on the kinds of claims you see about language out there in general. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good one.